How can misguidance happen when it's not a direct lie, but this beautifully decorated idea? Well, this theory we're looking at today suggests that the most dangerous kind of misguidance, it doesn't just come at you head-on. Nope. Instead, it works by subtly shifting your focus. It decorates the path with all these beautiful distractions until, before you even know it, you've been led somewhere completely different.
All right, let's get into it. Our first section is all about this interpretive view of misguidance. And it's super important to remember, this is just one lens, okay? It's a theory, a way of understanding how this whole subtle process could actually work. So here's the core idea of this whole thing. The goal isn't to get people to worship something that's, obviously evil. The strategy is way more subtle than that. It's about taking that feeling of awe, that reverence that, from a monotheistic viewpoint, belongs only to the Creator, and just gently redirecting it, shifting it onto things that were created, things like the sun, or a really respected person, or even a powerful idea.
And the foundation for this whole theory? It actually comes from verses like this one. The key phrase is right there. I will surely adorn the path. Just think about that for a second. The goal isn't to build a wall or create some huge obstacle. It's to make the wrong path so beautiful, so appealing, so distracting that you actually want to wander down it.
Okay, so if the path is being adorned, then what are the decorations? What are we talking about here? Well, according to this theory, the whole symbolic chain kicks off with two of the most powerful elements imaginable, fire and light. So this theory actually traces the symbolism all the way back to an origin story. It points to this specific verse, where Iblis, who represents Satan in the Quran, bases his pride, his arrogance on being created from fire. And in this whole framework, that one statement, I am better, you created me from fire, that becomes this symbolic seed for everything that comes after.
So you start with fire, right? From that single point, the theory draws a symbolic line to other huge sources of light in the cosmos. The logic goes something like this. If the original source of arrogance is fire, then what's the greatest source of fire we see every single day? The sun. So it becomes a really potent symbol. And by extension, so does the moon, which just reflects that same light.
But here's the thing. The source text is crystal clear on this. It explicitly warns against it. It says, hey, the sun and the moon, they're signs of God's power. They're not gods themselves. And according to this theory, the entire mechanism of misguidance hinges on getting people to blur that very specific line, to start worshiping the signpost instead of the destination it's pointing to.
Which brings up a really practical question, right? How do you actually get people to worship something as huge and distant as the sun? Well, the theory's answer is, you've got to bring that symbol down to earth. You have to translate it from this big cosmic idea into something tangible, something you can see and touch in your everyday culture.
And this is how it happens within this framework. Those huge abstract symbols, the sun, the moon, they get translated into physical icons. For example, the theory suggests that the reason some ancient cultures revered horned animals is because the horns look just like a crescent moon. Or think about the halo you see in so much religious art. What is that? It's literally a visual representation of the sun, of its light, placed around the head of a sacred figure. The symbols literally become physical.
So what's the psychological trick here? Why does this work so well? Well, the theory argues it's pretty simple. It's way harder to feel a deep connection to an abstract cosmic idea than it is to a physical thing you can see and touch. So, by turning the sun or the moon into a statue, an icon, or a symbol, you create something people can actually form an emotional bond with. And then over generations, that bond of just, appreciation can be subtly nudged into full-blown veneration.
Okay, this brings us right to the heart of the theory. We've talked about the symbols, we've talked about the psychology behind it. Now, let's break down the four-step process that this framework proposes for how an entire society can actually be led astray.
All right, so this four-step process, this is really the engine of the whole theory. First, a symbol gets highlighted. It's pulled out from the crowd and made to seem really special. Then step two, that symbol gets linked to something powerful, like salvation or divine protection. It's not just a shape anymore. Step three, people start to venerate the symbol itself. They're not just appreciating it now, they're actually directing worship to it. And then, the final most crucial step, that symbol gets mixed right into the core creed. It becomes a non-negotiable part of the faith, and that's when the line between the creation and the creator gets completely blurred.
And that is the ultimate result, according to this theory. See, the deviation isn't about getting people to flat out deny God.
It's about getting them to share the worship that's supposed to belong only to God. It's the subtle watering down of pure monotheism. You're not replacing the object of worship, you're just adding to it. And that's what completely upsets the balance.
Now, to make this a bit more concrete, the source actually uses the message of Jesus as a case study for how this framework could be applied. And this is super important. This is from the specific perspective of this Islamic interpretive theory, okay? So it draws a line between what it defines as the original message, pure monotheism, and what it sees as a later symbolic shift. A shift where the status of Jesus as a prophet, a messenger of God, kind of evolved into the status of divinity itself.
And to back up that original message side of the comparison, the theory points to verses from the Quran, just like this one. In it, the message that's attributed to Jesus is a really clear, direct call to worship the one God, establishing that He is the Lord of everyone.
All right, and that brings us to our final note, and honestly, this part is absolutely crucial. We have to frame everything we've just talked about in the right way. The source material is extremely clear that this is a symbolic reading. This is not being presented as a historical account.
So the source gives some really important disclaimers that we need to keep in mind. First off, this is an interpretive opinion. It's a symbolic reading of events. It is absolutely not presented as proven historical fact. And maybe most importantly, it is not an accusation against any person or any culture. It's just offered up as one possible way of thinking, a framework for understanding how misguidance might work, not through force but through attraction, through that beautifully adorned path.
And so this whole theory really leaves us with one massive question to think about in our own lives. When you look at the world around you, when you look at your own beliefs, where do you draw the line? What's the difference between a healthy appreciation for the symbols, the people, and the beauty of creation, and the kind of creedal veneration that this theory warns us about? That's the real question, isn't it? Where is that line?